What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
Well, I mean, as you can see, it's a big day for me. I got this new background over the weekend. It has quite the wood smell, so I feel like I'm in like a log cabin or something like that, but it's awesome. We are coming in nice and clear here, and very, very nice upgraded background there. So ready to talk about some of the crazy situations that we have coming out of week 8. And I think maybe put a few more guys in the coping corner, Harmon.
We shall see. Yeah, Boone, if you're watching us live or you're watching us back on YouTube, Boone's got a nice new camera. He's got a new background. He looks like a true professional, which is great because we're going to need his true professionalism, his real expertise on this episode because we have a lot to get into here. It's a spooky week on the pod because we've got Halloween coming up on Friday, which is great because we've got some scary situations to talk about in the panic meter for this week's episode. Structure of the show before we get into it, for those of you who are new or need a refresher, first and second segment, this is the panic meter. And we have shout out to you guys. You absolutely brought it this week. We have a ton of great email submissions to get into. I think we're only doing one social media submission. So packed first two segments, then segment 3 and 4. That's when we're going to get into the waiver wire. And there's some interesting players to discuss too that we can add to our fantasy rosters heading into week number 9. I can't believe time is flying as it is. But with that, it is time to fire up the post week 8 People's Panic Meter.
Would you say it's time for everyone to panic? Yes, I would, Kent.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. No! Wait! Everybody stay calm. Stay calm. What's the procedure? Stay calm.
The Panic Meter is presented by Dentech, protecting your teeth from fantasy stress, one matchup at a time. We have 4 tiers here in the People's Panic Meter. We've got no panic, we've got some panic, we have total panic, and we have coping corner. Before we talk coping corner here real quick, Boone, I want to just kind of, it's the mid-season point, right? We're done with week 8. We're officially in the meat of the season. Just want to do a little quick reminder about what these tiers mean here, at least to me. And I know this is sort of a moving target definition, especially because I had a exchange with someone over the weekend that they're like, you had Josh Downs as a total panic player. You gave up on him after week 1. Listen, total panic does not mean we have given up on the player. Even coping corner does not mean we have given up on the player because, as we'll discuss the coping corner in just a second, we could take guys out of the coping corner if things have fundamentally changed. But again, I the whole idea of this panic meter segment, which I love doing, when a couple years ago before you came on, Boone, we came up with the segment, it was a little bit tongue in cheek. Like, I generally think you shouldn't be really panicking about anything. That's really not how you're going to make good decisions in life, and certainly not in fantasy football. But just a little reminder, for the folks out there, if we're total panicking or even we're coping corner, things can change. It's a long season, and we're right in the middle of that long season right now.
Yeah, and I think it's good that there's 2 of us here because we've already seen a few times over the course of the season where we've got to talk to each other back on certain guys or even pushed. I mean, I remember, I think it was last week, you kind of pushed for one and we ended up landing somewhere in the middle on the guy. I think that's a good way to do it. If it was just one of us coming down with our takes and, being the judge and jury on everything, I don't think we'd get as good results here. But the way we're doing it together and kind of bouncing things back and forth, it's a good approach, though I will say for everybody out there, this is still my first season doing this. And even I'm kind of learning as we go here, because when we started, I thought coping corner was like the place from which you do not return. And yet you guys keep reminding me that, no, if a guy actually plays really well, he could come back. And I think there's somebody in the coping corner right now that we need to bring back, Harmon.
I agree with you. So the state of the coping corner heading into Monday Night Football, the final game of week 8, Calvin Ridley, Isaiah Pacheco, TJ Hawkinson, Tony Pollard, Travion Henderson, Justin Fields, and Chase Brown. I gave Justin Fields his flowers yesterday for what was an awesome win, a big moment for him where he quite literally said after the game that the team owner saying that we can't complete a pass was, quote, outside noise. I know he said, I know he owns the team, but that's still outside noise to me. Love that from Justin Fields, who I've met in person. He is a really awesome guy. By all accounts, everybody loves coaching him, loves playing with him. So shout out to Justin Fields. I don't know if we're taking him out of the coping corner. You can push back on that maybe, but I think the guy we should talk about is Chase Brown, who over the last 2 weeks has really turned it on from a fantasy perspective. So are you at a point where you're now because this is what, when we're taking guys out of the coping corner, this is what we have to do. Are you now reassessing where the situation stands with Chase Brown because of what the offense looks like with Joe Flacco?
Yeah, and I feel kind of foolish because if you recall when everything went down, the Joe Burrow injury and some of those bad games, I kept saying that like later in the season, the Bengals schedule is going to get easier. We might actually see these guys have a little bit of value. Now, that was even before Joe Flacco showed up and kind of changed the dynamic and changed the equation there entirely. But yeah, I think Chase Brown, like, come on down. He is out. He has crawled his way back from the fire here. He is back in the land of relevant fantasy players. He got back-to-back weeks with over 100 scrimmage yards. And I mean, he's got another good matchup this week against the Bears. If you look further down the schedule as well, when things are very, very meaningful for fantasy, weeks 13 to week 16, there's a tough matchup there in week 17. But weeks 13 to week 16, Ravens, Bills, Ravens, Dolphins, I think he's going to have some great performances the rest of the way, as long as Joe Flacco can stay healthy, which is also another very important thing because we saw Joe Flacco get a little banged up in this game. He is an older guy playing behind a bad offensive line, so we could lose Flacco at any moment. But as long as Flacco stays out there, as long as this offense keeps humming, yeah, I think we got to bring Chase Brown out of the coping corner.
Yeah, again, the situation has fundamentally changed. When we put him into the coping corner, it was, well, look what this offense looks like with Jake Browning. It's a complete mess, and it was already going to be Chase Brown's a good player, but the vast majority of his fantasy output was going to come from the fact that he played for this great offense in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow and the boys, and obviously that just wasn't going to be the case with Jake Browning behind center. Browning even underperformed my expectations, but for Joe Flacco being there, I think this looks like an offense we can reinvest into some of these priority pieces, and Chase Brown has been a priority piece. So officially, Chase Brown is our first coping corner resurrection player, which is perfect, right on time for Halloween. So shout out to Chase Brown. He bucks the odds. We don't normally end up taking players out of the coping corner. It isn't like, oh, it just happens all the time, but this is a guy where the situation has fundamentally changed. So yes, he is now a player. What that means is that if Chase Brown goes out next week and has 15 carries for 30 yards and no touchdowns, and Samaje Perine vultures 3 goal line scores, you can panic about that. That's all it means when a guy's in the coping corner. It's just like, hey, this is the situation. Accept it for what it is. No more panic. So now we're eligible basically to panic about Chase Brown going forward.
I will say, too, there's no one else that I want to pull out this week. I agree with you on the Fields thing. Like, he took advantage of a good matchup, so I don't think it's time to bring him out on that. And the thing with Fields is, he's had 4 easy matchups this year, right? And guess what? He's crushed all of them for fantasy. The rest of his games, not so much. So I think, he's coming back from the bye. When he comes back from the bye in week 10, it's going to be the Browns. It's going to be the Patriots. Would it shock you if we're not right back in that conversation about whether Tyrod Taylor or someone else needs to start there? I think we're going to be back in that mix later in the season. It's not going to take that long, but yeah, he's going on bye this week. Let's see 2 big games before we actually pull Fields out of there. And then Travion Henderson, I know some people probably think that we should pull him out because he finally showed some signs of life, but he continues to make these rookie mistakes. He fumbled the ball in that game, and he only played like 20% of the snaps. So we need to see a little more from him. It's a great sign that he finally did something, because one of my biggest problems with him is that we weren't seeing any big plays. We weren't seeing anything exciting that could at least give you some hope that later in the season he could become more in that offense. This week we saw something, and yet he still makes a mistake out there. So he still has a ways to go, but at least we can acknowledge him that he made some plays. He had a decent game this week, and let's hope he can build off that.
All right, perfect. With that, let's move on to the submissions to the panic meter this week, starting with a big section on running backs. Let's begin with this video from Kyle on Rico Dowdle.
Hey guys, love the show. Shout out to the Colts, go JT, shout out to McLaren, shout out to F1. But yeah, I got to rant on this really quickly. As a Rico Dowdle owner, I don't have words. I don't understand. I understand most of us got him off waivers or got him late in the draft, but he's clearly the Panthers' best player outside of McMillan. Like, it's not even close. He's averaging, again, 8 touches he's averaging, 6.8 yards per carry yesterday. And I understand Chuba is loved by the organization. He was just paid, but in a team that struggles to have playmakers on their squad, why are we not using your best playmaker? Like, he's clearly the better back. I don't know. Yeah, it could be someone that was really hoping that Dowdle would still be able to sit in his RB2 spot, but it's really looking like he's not even getting goal line carries now. Chuba punched in a touchdown yesterday, but yeah, it's frustrating because you watch this guy who is explosive. He's fun to watch. He's really good with the ball in his hands after the catch. But see, even my 2-year-old son's upset about it. But yeah, let me know, because yeah, it doesn't even seem like he's in the flex consideration at this point. Maybe, but maybe I'm overreacting.
Okay, I'll admit, when I first opened this video from Kyle, I was like, this is too long to play on the show. We'll have to cut this somewhere. Like when he's starting to go a little bit about, just the frustration of it all. I was like, all right, we might have to limit this a little bit. And then when he has the 2-year-old, which I didn't even know is in the video for the audience that's just listening to this, you don't see the 2-year-old because Kyle's filming this in his car. You don't even see that he's in the back seat. And when the kid starts whining, I was like, and he goes, see, even my 2-year-old is frustrated by Rico Dowdle. That was perfect. So shout out to Kyle for a fantastic video submission. Love that. Love that you just parked somewhere and you're like, hey, listen, kid, pipe down while I gotta rant to the boys about Rico Dowdle. Absolutely love that. All right, what is the level of frustration? What is the panic on Rico Dowdle right now, Boone? We have some quotes to read from Dave Canales here, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Well, I think the quotes are a big part of it for sure. For me, it's just some panic because I think they have to make the change. And I mean, I think we have to bring up the quotes here from Canales because it kind of changes everything, right? Like, he talks about Chuba Hubbard has meant a lot to this team. We wanted to give him an opportunity following his calf injury, but we can't ignore the fact that Rico Dowdle has been exceptional. He got asked if Rico Dowdle could have a heavier workload moving forward and said it's something we're looking at. I think the way he's talking might be setting everyone up for what will be a tough decision in that locker room, because we've mentioned how much people in that locker room, in that organization, love Chuba Hubbard, the contract they gave him last year, and yet he is just not playing very well, right? Maybe he's not 100%. I think I talked about when he came back from the injury, was he worried that he was going to lose his job? Did he rush back from the injury? Because he doesn't look like the same player at all. He's averaging under 3 yards per carry right now, 26 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown, 2 catches for 24 yards. That's over the last 2 games here. He's playing around 55% of the snaps. Meanwhile, in that time, you have Dowdle, who's just playing around 40% of the snaps. It went down from 47 2 weeks ago to just 36 this week. But he gained 133 rushing yards on 25 carries. He's got 17 yards on 1 catch. He's by far the most effective back that they have right now. It would be terrible, terrible coaching if they don't make a change and start to give Dowdle more work. It's not going to be 70-30, but we got to get Dowdle the first series. We got to get Dowdle out there as the 60-40 guy, not as the guy who's just playing 40% of the snaps or less here. And you never know, like, he could say those quotes to the media and then nothing really changes. That's always a possibility. But I think if they're serious about winning, they have to get Dowdle out there as the lead back. So for me, it's just some panic. And really, it might have been total panic if it weren't for these quotes. They're the things that are giving me just a little bit of hope. But Harmon, is this not kind of like the Seahawks backfield where we keep saying, like, Kenneth Walker, the much more effective guy, and yet the team just keeps rolling them out, with Charbonnet being the guy who's not getting as many yards, not getting as much production, but he's getting the touchdowns, ends up being an okay fantasy play, and it just brings the ceiling down for both guys. So even if Rico Dowdle becomes the 60-40 guy, it's not going to put him back to where he was. I'm sorry, everyone. Those 2 games where he was the man, he's not going back there. But if he can get the lead job at least, then you could play him a little more confidently as an RB2 in your lineup.
Oh, yeah. If you think that Rico Dowdle is going back to owning the full backfield and doing what he did in those 2 games without Chuba Hubbard, like, you got to put yourself in the coping corner, okay? Because that's not going to happen here. But not only are you interpreting it that way, that's kind of how I'm interpreting these quotes. We just showed Joe Person from The Athletic. Again, I mentioned before, I've followed Joe's work for a long time. He has covered this team forever, and that's how he was interpreting it, saying it seems pretty clear that Dave Canales is going to give Rico Dowdle the lion's share of the carries. While he understands the dynamic of reducing a role of a popular player like Chuba Hubbard, Canales says, quote, the heart of it is winning games and putting our best foot forward, which you mentioned this, giving Rico Dowdle the first series. That's what I want to caution people against, is assuming that even if the roles flip here, that Chuba Hubbard is going to completely go away. I think there is a 0% chance that Chuba Hubbard even takes a clear backseat to Rico Dowdle, because Chuba Hubbard is still good. I agree with you, hasn't looked good the last 2 weeks, but let's not act like this guy wasn't one of the best backs, one of the most efficient, successful backs on a per carry basis last season. Was really kind of the heart and soul of that team, and had good weeks to start this year. He's coming off an injury, which I'm sure has slowed his performance, but the reality is, one of the things I've talked about with this Panthers team is they start so slow in these games, and giving Chuba Hubbard the less explosive back right now, that first series, it's part of what's putting them behind in the scoreboard. And you saw that even the game that they won the week prior, you saw that they had that issue. But certainly in this game, they fell behind to your Bills really quick. And then, I mean, with freaking Andy Dalton's your quarterback, it's over so quickly. So I think we'll see Rico get the start. I think we'll see, because this is a meritocracy. He's just played better. He's earned it. He's going to get the start, and then he will get the first series, and then we'll see how it goes from there. I do think your comparison of the Seahawks backfield is probably how this looks, and it's going to make both of these guys kind of, one's a running back 2 and one is a flex play, which is, I think, kind of what the Seahawks backfield is. I just think this rushing environment is going to be a little bit better than Seattle's.
Yeah, the thing that I'm worried about as you were talking there that I started to think about is, okay, what if it is partially the injury with Hubbard? And so, yeah, okay, they give it to Dowdle, next week he gets 55%, 60%. And then little by little, Hubbard is removed from the injury, starts to get a little healthier. And then we just end up at like a 50-50 backfield, and it's frustrating week to week. I think that could be where this goes. Like, it is going to be problematic. That's why it's some panic and not no panic on Rico Dowdle. But I held off from the total panic because those quotes are fairly positive. You don't normally see a coach kind of come out and talk like that. So if he is saying that, I get why the beat writers are interpreting it that way and figuring that we're going to see Rico Dowdle get more work, because it's awesome to see a coach come out and kind of acknowledge that and give props to the veteran guy and the guy who's that, leader on their team, in the same breath kind of going, you know what, we got this other guy that's playing a lot better, and we're going to have to give him the work. And I think the team's going to be better for it. And I think fantasy managers will be happier as long as Dowdle can answer the bell when he gets those opportunities and continue to be the more effective guy, which we'll see if that changes at all throughout the season if Hubbard gets healthier.
Yeah, I buy Canales when he says this. This is the guy that benched Bryce Young last year when he wasn't playing well. The former number 1 overall pick, a guy who played Jalen Coker as a UDFA last year. I think it's hey, you earn it. You go ahead and you get that. I mean, hey, he made Chuba Hubbard the starter last year when Miles Sanders was on a big fat contract. So it's, again, this is a situation where the best player will play. And I think right now Rico Dowdle's playing well. They're in Green Bay this week, so it's not even that great of a matchup. But then the Saints and the Falcons after that, the Niners, there are some good spots for this Panthers team before they face the Rams in week 13 and then a bye week 14. So I think that's a good discussion point on that Panthers backfield. Let's go to another situation here. Anthony sends this in on Breece Hall. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm panicked, which no kidding. He just had his best game of the season, did Breece Hall. But what do I do with Breece Hall? His schedule, if he doesn't get traded, seems a bit up and down. Plus, he's almost splitting with Isaiah Davis. And if he does get dealt, would that even make his situation that much better? So should I sell high or just ride it out? What is your level of panic on Breece Hall after, again, his best game of the season?
I know this is going to seem so strange, and yet it's still total panic. Now, there's a bunch of caveats we got to go through here, right? So if you have a winning record, I'm willing to ride it out with him because I think there is a chance that he gets traded. Okay. He's got some better matchups down the road where he could help you. But the person writing in here is right. Like, the schedule is going to be scary. Over the next 3 weeks, he is probably not going to do much for your fantasy team. Like, he just took advantage of a good matchup. Now the matchups are not going to be good. He's got to bye this week, then the Browns, then the Patriots. That is not ideal. So if you are around 500, if you have a losing record, I think you have to trade him. I think you have to try to capitalize on that big game, which is probably going to be, let's face it, his best game of the season. You go out, you capitalize on that, you trade him for something that can actually help you maybe right the ship over the next few weeks here, because I just don't think you're going to see anything close to that from him. And I'm not even sure if you're going to get, even decent numbers from him in those games against that Browns defense. And then obviously against the Patriots defense, they got a very, very strong front there, good run defense. So I think you have to move him and you keep him for, if you do have the winning record, then you hold, and you hold for the better matchups down the road, like the Ravens they play, the Dolphins, who everybody kills, the Saints. Like, he can come through on those if he sticks around. And if not, if he gets traded, he's probably going to a contender, which would be pretty good, I would think, for his fantasy value, right? So that's kind of how I view this one. It's total panic for most fantasy managers. But if you have a really good winning record, if your team can kind of, weather the storm here, I would hang on to him in that situation and that situation only.
No, I think that's really good analysis. I kind of lightly hinted at that. Is this a sell high moment for Breece Hall on the recap show with Chris Allen? I think you're kind of hammering home the point there. I will say that matchup in Baltimore against the Ravens, I just want to put it on people's radar because I've seen this a lot in the reaction to the Bears game. Well, the Bears passing game really struggled against what's been one of the worst defenses in the league. That Ravens defense is coming off a bye. We saw this with them last year where they were super generous in the first half of the season, and then they kind of flipped Kyle Hamilton's role, and then they were really good to end the season. Now, they're still pretty banged up. They do have some spots that are concerning, but I do just want to put it on the radar that Ravens one, especially when we're doing schedule analysis, they might be actually a pretty good defense in the back half of the year. But regardless, still coming off the bye and facing the Browns and the Patriots, that's a tough spot for Breece Hall. So I like your point to kind of give him a bit of a total panic, with the caveat of it matters where your team is from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, I think with the Ravens defense, I'm a little more worried about their pass defense getting better. I still think they're going to have some issues in the run game just based on guys being out for the season and stuff. Some of the injuries that they had in the secondary, it's those guys that are coming back, right? So we'll see, but it's a good point by you that some of these situations are going to change. Some teams that were bad early in the season, they're going to get guys back healthy. Some rookies are going to start to step up. We got to keep kind of adapting as we go here. People always got to keep that in mind. Yep.
All right, next one comes in from Jeff on Josh Jacobs. Matt and Justin, should I be worried about Josh Jacobs? Sure, he scored, but when it came to icing the game, he was not on the field. Is this now a timeshare? Just to back up Jeff's point here, Boone, in weeks 1 to 6, Josh Jacobs had an 80% share of the running back touches for the Green Bay Packers. These last 2 weeks, it's around 58, 59%. So do you have any panic on lead back, quote unquote, Josh Jacobs?
I don't. I think it's the injury, is it not? Like, he's been playing through an injury. Yeah. He's been limited in practice. He's been missing some practice. I think that's the situation the last couple of weeks why he probably has a little less work. And to me, the fact that he scored, 9 touchdowns this year, he's got 5 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, he's still getting it done for you, even on that reduced volume. So I think that's a great thing. I think that's a sign of how productive he is, how good he is for fantasy. And assuming he does get healthy coming away from this injury, the further he gets away from it, I think he's going to go right back to getting big workloads and crushing for you in fantasy. So no, I wouldn't panic at all on this one. I think he's an awesome fantasy back. And I think he's still been producing for you. So I think you might be getting a little too cute on that one. When you start to break it down, it's very good to analyze all this stuff, but make sure you're taking into account that there's an injury situation there. I don't think this is turning into any sort of committee. Although, have you heard anything about Marshawn Lloyd? Like, is Marshawn Lloyd coming back at all this year, Harmon? Like, he went on IR again.
Nothing.
And then there's just been no word about him at all. And Emmanuel Wilson has taken over the number 2 role there. And that's kind of the way we're going. So I say it because every Monday when I write my waiver wire column, I have an IR stash section at the bottom of each position. And I keep throwing Marshawn Lloyd in there, just if you have the open IR spot, put him on that and hold on to him. But I haven't heard any sort of updates. There was one maybe a few weeks ago that he was nearing a return, but I don't even think that was coming from the team. I think that was just people speculating that his IR, the designated time for those 4 weeks was coming to an end. So I would like to see him come back. And if the reason I bring that up is because if he came back, he might be the only one who I think could start to carve out more of a role and take things away from Josh Jacobs. Not that he's going to overtake him for the job by any means, but I think he could be a guy, if he could stay healthy, that might be able to do that. Emmanuel Wilson, Chris Brooks, they're not doing that. They're decent backups, but they're not guys that are going to turn this into a committee.
Totally agree. I just Googled news on Marshawn Lloyd. The top 3 headlines for Marshawn Lloyd in least to most recent is one, what happened to Marshawn Lloyd? Question. Then what will Marshawn Lloyd's role be when he returns 3 weeks ago? And then the most recent one is A.J. Dillon could suddenly be available amid Packers silence on Marshawn Lloyd. So, yeah, no,
Wow.
There's no updates on Marshawn Lloyd. And I'm with you. No panic on Josh Jacobs, who, let's not forget, week 7, he was like a true game time decision. We didn't even know if he was going to play. And I don't know if people saw this. They can go look it up on social media, I'm sure. But he had like an emotional speech to the guys after that win about how he's like, if I can go at, like, you guys mean so much to me. It looked like he was about to cry. Like, if I can go, you guys mean so much to me. I'm going to go out and grit through it. So yes, it's like a bit of a win-lose in fantasy because he's probably not going to be his usual effectiveness if he goes out there, but you're also still playing him and still getting something from him during the stretch. So any moment now, maybe it's this game against the Panthers, any moment now, he could just flip it on and he's back to Josh Jacobs, 80% of the touches, set it and forget it, top 5 running back in fantasy.
And the only other thing I will say about him is he has a matchup with the Lions in week 13. That's a pretty good run defense. Other than that, go look at his schedule. It is a lot of green.
Yeah,
it is a
nice.
lot of friendly matchups in the second half of the season. So I think he is going to have some huge games for fantasy managers.
All right. Last running back one comes in from Zach on Alvin Kamara. Howdy. Love a howdy. Love the show. Came for Boone, stayed for Harmon. I appreciate that. I'm glad that I wasn't so awful to drive you away from your guy, Justin Boone here. And I appreciate all the Boone Brigade that came in here to join the show with us. Alvin Kamara, he's cooked, right? Thanks, Zach. Love the simplicity here. What's the panic level on Alvin Kamara, Boone?
Oh, I hate to do this, Harmon. This guy has been so good for so long in fantasy. He's going to the coping corner. How could he not, right?
Yeah.
He hasn't topped 35 rushing yards in over a month here. You know, he got banged up this week too. I don't know if you saw that. It was like ankle, knee, like he's a tough guy. He keeps trying to play through this stuff, but he's not the same player. Even before that injury, he's not the same player. He's not getting as many targets this year. Like Kellen Moore just not using him that way like he had been in the past where he was catching like 80 balls every season, not being used that way anymore. So that's not there to save his fantasy value. He's not scoring touchdowns. He's only got 1 touchdown this year, I'm pretty sure. Like, what is there to hang your hat on? You thought maybe this week, maybe this would be the week. Kendre Miller's out. They have to go to him. They have to give him huge volume. He'll come through. He's not coming through. I just don't see a scenario. I think they're going to get other guys involved. I think Devin Neal is somebody to go out and stash because down the stretch, are they going to start to look at these younger guys that they have on the roster? Probably. We saw Devin Neal get a little bit involved in this game. So, yeah, Alvin Kamara, this one hurts to do it. But in my mind, Harmony's got to go to the coping corner.
Yep, I agree with you. He says he doesn't want to get traded. He said, I guess that I could be traded, but, and then I'll just go sip a pina colada somewhere else. He's in sipping pina colada mode. So I think he's kind of like pre-retired at this point, is Alvin Kamara. He's thinking about what's
Seems
next
like
in
it.
New Orleans for him after his career. And I don't blame him. He's had a great career. He, at this point, though, is just not an effective back. I mentioned it last week in terms of his success rate compared to other running backs. This is just not a good run game period, and unfortunately he needs to be a good running back because of that pass game usage, which has gone to the wide receivers. We'll talk about those guys a little bit more later. So that's just the state of the state with Alvin Kamara. I agree, he is our coping corner candidate this week. All right, that's our running back panic players. Let's get into some wide receiver panic here, but before we do, I just want to quickly call up this graphic first from Hayden Winks that he shared last week. So obviously this is just the first not week 8, of course. This was heading into last week. But Hayden says, as usual, comments are crazy about wide receivers having bad games. You'll sleep a lot better once you come to grips about how volatile scoring is week to week. These are the top 50 wide receivers removing injured games. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Take a breath. I could not agree. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not watching on YouTube, it's worth just looking at the graphic to see the amount of just green, red, up and down, up and down. That is just how this position is. I say it on the show all the time. I just thought that was a great visual representation of what I mean when this position just, and it's, I hate to say it. I'm not going to actually say what I said on social media because this is a family show. stuff happens at this position. Just stuff happens. And sometimes the explanation could be as simple as that when it comes to this position. So that's just a level set here before we get into some of these wide receivers where we can call back to this because it's going to be instructive. But first, submission to the wide receiver panic meter here. And I think this is history, Boone. You've been on the show now for just this season. I think this is the first time ever this happened. We got history made. Our first ever mid-game panic submission comes in here. Greetings, Coping Corner Commissioners. This is sent in from Krabby Fantasy Football Fan. Greetings, Coping Corner Commissioners. Courtland Sutton needs to be slammed into the Coping Corner until Sean Payton leaves Denver. He is no longer Mr. Consistency we once knew. He is now a touchdown scratch-off ticket like Will Fuller or Rashad Bateman. I love Rashad Bateman, but come on, guys. When Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant are getting designer plays made for them and Sutton is just running around, it's not a fun experience to have him on my fantasy team. Do I need to treat the Broncos games the same as Jags, Jets, and Browns games and just look at the box score when the game is over? Sincerely, Krabby Fantasy Football Fan. This was shocking to me to see mid-game on Courtland Sutton. Boone, I think the consistency of Sutton is a little bit understated. Like, he does have floor games. He's had a few this year, but I don't know. What is our level of panic on Courtland Sutton after getting like 67 yards last week?
I mean, I'm not sure what people's expectations are for this guy, but you nailed it. Like, he has been pretty consistent this season. I don't even necessarily view him as like Mr. Consistency, but you look at his numbers from this year, like his last 5 games, 118 yards and a touchdown, 81 yards and a touchdown, 99 yards. He had one game, 17 yards. Okay, that's not great. But then 87 yards. And then this week, even though I know it was sent mid-game, so maybe he didn't, have these stats yet because he did a lot of it in the second half, but he had 67 yards in this game. And 67 yards on top of the fact that he had a touchdown called back on an OPI, right, on offensive pass interference. He had a drop in the end zone. He could have had a touchdown there. So there was opportunities for this to be a much, much bigger game. I still see him. Yeah, he's not a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. He has that kind of ceiling, but week to week, he's not going to be ranked there unless he's in a really, really good matchup. And we thought this was going to be a good matchup for him. He didn't blow the doors off in it. It happens sometimes, like you said, but he's a very good wide receiver 2 in fantasy. So I'm not sure what the expectation is from people. I mean, I would recommend, like, if people are sending in like mid-game panic meter questions, one of the things I do is at 1:00 or whenever the games start, I shut all the apps down initially. I don't want to look for at least like the first quarter. Like, don't freak out because there's a ton of game left, right? Like, the guys can blow up in the second half. Like, it's fine. Like, don't go crazy and panic from like, minute 1 of a game. There's a lot of time. So just relax, enjoy the game, and then start to check your fantasy teams like crazy, which you're never really going to do. It's just don't do it like too early because you'll watch and you'll see the projections change and you'll get really worried. Yeah. You don't need to because there's a lot of time in games, and Courtland Sutton still came through and had a pretty good performance for you. Yeah, it wasn't a huge game like we necessarily projected, but it was still an okay game. 67 yards is not going to lose you your week. So no panic for me on Courtland Sutton. I think he's still a very good receiver, even though he's in an offense where they get other guys involved. They have a rotation of the other wideouts. We see other guys pop off, and some of the other younger guys are coming on, but I don't think they're a threat to Courtland Sutton as the number 1 guy in that offense.
Yeah, 8.7 points in half PPR here. Like, that's fine. You can get away with that. It's actually his only mid game of the year. Usually the 2 down games has been fewer than 3 points, which, like I said, that's where I think the consistency is a little overrated from him because he's going to have big weeks. But I mean, he's been a perfect fit in Sean Payton's offense as that X receiver. I actually look like Troy Franklin's been coming on a little bit with touchdowns. Pat Bryant made it in the end zone. I think that could be helpful for the offense overall because they need like a second threat. So, no panic for me on Courtland Sutton. I'm echoing Boone's statement there, and we'll talk more throughout the week about Troy Franklin's kind of emergence in this room. But we're going to toss to our first break here. We're going to continue with wide receivers after the break and a certain Chargers wideout and an update on the pen meter. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we are back. We're continuing to talk through some wide receiver submissions to the People's Panic Meter, starting with this one from Eric on Quentin Johnston. Shout out to Eric. Sometimes I think the TNF players get forgotten here. Sends in, love the show. Finally getting this one in early. I put a lot of trade requests last week and ended up getting BTJ and Aaron Jones for Quentin Johnston. I had to shed some players after Aaron came off bye, but my league mate didn't accept until after the Thursday night game when QJ didn't even get a target. I was he kind of goes on and on about some of his individual players, which appreciate that. Says, please, cartographer of the route tree, shed some light on these lightning bolts here. What's going on in the Chargers wide receiver room? Side note, did mention that RJ Harvey, he had RJ Harvey for the last 3 weeks and then released him to make some roster judgments. So said, shout out to anyone who got the RJ Harvey desperation. And I wanted to give a shout out to the folks who sent in the RJ Harvey lineups. I totally forgot. I said, hey, send me your RJ Harvey lineups on the show on Sunday. And then this morning I see a bunch of RJ Harvey lineups in my mentions. Like, oh, right, I did say that. So shout out to you folks who sent me that. But on this question here, what the hell are we doing with Quentin Johnston? What is the panic on QJ after a hot start to this season?
I mean, first we have to acknowledge the pen meter is up there, and you are looking quite good in that.
Baby.
I don't think we have any panic when it comes to the pen meter right now for you. So hats off to you on that one. For QJ, it's total panic right now in my mind. And first up, before we get into this, actually, let's address something from that question. If someone is going in and accepting a trade after a game is played and after a guy has like a bad performance, I don't know about you, Harmon. I think that's kind of shady. Like, I've seen trades go down in leagues where like a player gets injured and then someone goes and accepts a trade with the injured player because it was just sitting out there. And I know technically that this is why I do this. After like 24 hours, if I don't get a response, I revoke it. I pull that trade back, that offer. I don't want to leave things sitting out because I know things like this could happen. But as long as the other manager was okay with this trade going through, that's fine. But to me, I don't think it's fair game to just go accept the trade after the game start, regardless. For QJ, total panic. And we're just seeing that Oronde Gadsden's coming on at tight end. He's basically a big wide receiver anyway. That's kind of QJ's thing. There's another situation where QJ had an injury, right? So is he 100% healthy? Did they rush him back? Might not be quite the same guy that he was early in the season health-wise, so that could be a factor here. There's just a lot of things going on, but it has to be total panic. I mean, we have a 3-game sample now where he's been held under 40 yards. Like, that's huge. And yes, he can still get there certain weeks with touchdowns. Yes, he is still going to have some boom games, but we just have so many hands calling for the ball in this offense now. And I don't think the Oronde Gadsden thing is just a flash in the pan. I think this guy is a legit asset in real life and in fantasy. So I am very, very worried. I think it's total panic on QJ. I also think, and I'm just adding on to the question here, but I also think it's kind of total panic on Keenan Allen because his snaps were way down in this game. I think he's starting to look more like he's just a wide receiver 3 flex option, a guy who probably needs a touchdown to come through for you. I'm worried about those guys, but it all comes back to Ladd McConkey kind of reestablishing himself as the number 1 receiver there. Oronde Gadsden establishing himself as a legit weapon at tight end. And that pushes these other receivers into a range where they're a lot more risky for fantasy.
Yeah, Ladd McConkey the last 3 weeks leads the team in routes, leads the team with 34 targets. He's making it happen here. So I think that, look, he is the best. He's the best receiver on the team. He's the best pass catcher on the team is Ladd McConkey. So this is why I said it was going to normalize. This is the whole point of the stupid pen comment, is that he's the best player. He was playing great on film. Now the targets are going his way. That doesn't mean like QJ's not going to pop back up. Keenan's not going to pop back up. Oronde Gadsden's real. Like that. I'm a little bit more only some panic on QJ, but maybe my expectations were just a little bit more realistic on QJ. That these last 3 weeks have obviously been hellacious, but he is coming back from the injury, and I think he's going to have moments towards the end of the season. But your Keenan Allen point is interesting too, because Oronde Gadsden is 109 routes the last 3 weeks, 92 for Keenan. With Keenan at this stage, he's never going to be a full-time player. And Gadsden kind of took some of those layup looks from him against the Vikings defense, where I thought Keenan might get some of those layup targets. But shout out to Keenan Allen, him and his wife having a great time at the Chargers Halloween party with Justin Herbert and Madison Beer. If people have not seen the picture that I shared this on my Twitter page, they can check that out. Keenan's having a good time. Even he's not having a good time in your fantasy football lineup. So no, I'm not too concerned about Keenan. He's still getting it done in one way, that's for sure. On Oronde Gadsden, we got this question from the YouTube chat. Are you guys starting Gadsden over like wide receiver 3s and running back 2s? I'm assuming they have a tight end like Tucker Kraft or something, and then they want to flex Gadsden. Where are you at with the Arande Gadsden as a flex player idea?
Wide receiver or running back 2 probably depends on the week in terms of buys. Like last week when it was by Mageddon, perhaps you were going to start him over some RB2s. I don't think in a normal week I would do that, but wide receiver 3s, all those flex options down there, I would definitely put him over those guys. Like I said, I think he is a legit asset, and I think they realize that, and they're feeding him, and we'll see how defenses adjust here in the coming weeks. But yeah, I definitely would be playing him almost any way I could in my lineup, but don't get too cute and don't start to bump down like, wide receiver 2s or even maybe top 30 guys. Once you get outside of that, I definitely think you could start to consider him. And I will also say, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, Harmon, but I was looking up at one point, there are some like candy pens that you can buy out there, some edible pens. I was going to get one sent to you, but we have gone down a road now where I think you're going to be free and clear. So yeah, we don't need to send that to you and scare you now, but if you make it out of this without having to eat the pen, we should get that pen like bronzed or put up on the wall. We got to frame it somehow so we remember this.
It's just a crappy pen. Like it's the one I hold literally every show. It's because I'm an idiot and I need to be holding something. Anyways, I'm more just some panic on QJ. I think he's going to give you some weeks, but if you viewed him as a locked in every week consistent player, he has truly broken out into a new level this year, but this is still a crowded room and Ladd McConkey is just the better player. I see a lot of cope from people about like, oh, well, QJ is the first rounder. Okay. Give me a break, bro. Come on. QJ is also a guy who was not even like playable in his first couple of years. So shout out to him for improving legitimately, but he's still not the number one on this team. And I think that we're pretty set there. All right. Next question comes in from Daniel on the Saints pass catchers. Hey guys, love the show. Just wanted to ask, are the bond temps no longer rulizing? I don't even know what this means.
Les bon temps roulés. Come on, Harmon. Les bon temps roulés.
All right, well, bro, you can read it then. I don't know what that means.
So laissez les bon temps roulés is I speak French. I'm the Canadian background, right? I got the French thing going. Laissez les bon temps rouler, let the good times roll. That's all that means, Harmon. So all right, well, you could have said that before the show to not make me look like an idiot on the internet, which I have no problem doing myself. Come on. So, all right, I'll read it for you. Hi, guys. Love the show. Just wanted to ask, are the bon temps no longer rouléing in New Orleans? What do we do with Olave, Kamara, and Shaheed rest of season? Obviously, we already talked about Kamara, so we're going to look at the receivers here. I don't know if you want to chime in, Harmon, but for me, I do have some panic on Rashid Shaheed. I don't think I have any panic on Chris Olave, though. Like, he's still getting tons of volume. I think with Shaheed, the reason for some panic, like he's still having some games. He's not a guy that you necessarily felt like great having in your lineup week to week. He's more of that like wide receiver 4 flex play. I think he has the talent to be more, but he would need to be in a different offense to really be unlocked in my mind anyway. So he's just a boomer bust guy to me. Now, he did pick up a hip injury late in this week's game. I haven't seen an update on that yet, so that'll be another reason. Maybe monitor that. Maybe that would push up our panic. He's also somebody that's been rumored in trades. Any possibility of that could happen before the deadline, so maybe he could get traded to a contender. Hey, Bills, get on the phone, go get a receiver. We need help there. I would love to see that happen, but I mean, for Olave, I don't see any reason to panic on him. He's still getting tons of volume, maybe not as many touchdowns as you would like to see, but especially if Shaheed were to get moved, that would only lock in more targets for him. So I think he's fine. I don't have any panic on him.
Yeah, 86 yards per game the last 3 weeks. There's going to be maybe like one annoying drop or failure in contested catch for Chris Olave. Same things kind of happen with like Rome Odunze right now. When you're the only guy that gets a lot of volume in your offense, that is going to happen. So the question is just, what do we think about Tyler Shuck if he takes over here? But we'll address that more throughout the week if that news actually does come down. And I agree with you on Shaheed, just minor panic because he's the 2 in this offense. So if one guy's going to be more volatile, that will be Shaheed. But I do think if one guy's getting moved here, he's the more likely one to get traded. Yeah. So there could be some light at the end of the tunnel there. All right, Eric sends in Brian Thomas Jr., despite being on bye, which is just classic for how Brian Thomas Jr.'s season has gone so far. How freaked out should we be about Brian Thomas Jr. with his recent performances, the possible Travis Hunter breakout, and swirling trade rumors? On the trade rumors part, Liam Cohen said today, quote, "We have no plans on moving Brian Thomas Jr. at all," which I think makes sense. There was some speculation about this over the weekend that they were listening to calls. I believe Diana Rossini at Athletic had that quote. People listen to calls on everybody in the NFL, for the most, not everybody, but most players in the NFL, like, oh yeah, we'll listen, we'll take the call, and then we'll hang up. That doesn't mean that he is about to get traded or anything. I think it makes no sense to trade him if you're Jacksonville, unless you get some crazy offer from Buffalo. By the way, if one team was to trade for Brian Thomas Jr., it should be the Buffalo Bills, but that's a separate podcast for another time. But what is your level of panic on Brian Thomas as they come out of the bye? And even ESPN's Matt DiRocco today had an article about that Travis Hunter, he expects to be the wide receiver one coming out of the bye.
I mean, it just goes back. We had this conversation already, so I feel like I'm just going to repeat myself. But last week, I believe it was, we settled on total panic because you were almost willing. Am I wrong on this? This was the player, right? You were talking maybe Coping Corner. I was saying it was just some panic for me because the schedule was going to get better. He was still producing before he got hurt in that game. The 2 games prior, he had over 80 yards in each of those games. So I saw some light at the end of the tunnel that maybe he could turn this thing around, but the conversation really just goes back to your expectations. If you still think he could be that, top 12 receiver that you drafted, well, that's not realistic anymore. But could he get back to being a pretty consistent low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 for your lineup? I think he could. So if you can get him for very cheap, if people are really worried about him, I recommended, go get him, because you might end up with a wide receiver 2 in your lineup. This offense could definitely support both of these guys if they focus on these 2 guys and stop getting everyone else involved. They're not throwing to the tight end as much as they were early in the season. Now that Brenton Strange is hurt, we'll see when he's going to come back. But I still see at least a little bit of light, like that glimmer of hope for BTJ, that he could still come through as potentially a low-end wide receiver 2. He's not the guy that you drafted. You're not getting that kind of value back. So if that's why people are panicking, that's fine. But I'll settle back on total panic because that's where we were last week. And for me, I'm okay with keeping him at that.
I think I'm okay with that as well. I'm glad you talked me down from the Coping Corner. Again, it's about expectations. And going back to that up, down chart that we showed about wide receivers from Hayden Winks, I said when I reposted that 95% of the time you can just chalk it up to, hey, stuff happens. I do think BTJ exists in that 5% this year where it's something a little bit different than just variance with him. But he's a talented player, and I'm sure they spent some time in the bye week in addition to figuring out how can we get Travis Hunter ramped up more as the one in the offense. How do we get Brian Thomas Jr. in some situations that make a little bit more sense for his skill set than maybe what they wanted him to do during the season? And maybe he spent the bye week decompressing, watching his favorite movies, treating himself to some nice ice cream, maybe locking in a little bit, who knows? And he's feeling a little bit better coming out of the bye. We can exercise some of these drop demons and we can get going here. So I like your analysis on BTJ. Let's just keep him at total panic for now. Last wide receiver we're going to talk about here. Tyler sends this in on Matthew Golden. Is it time to drop Matthew Golden? Christian Watson comes back and immediately has more opportunities, and 3 other pass catchers see 3+ targets while Golden only has 3. Not to mention Reed isn't even playing yet. I think it's Coping Corner time. Also, let's go Blue Jays. So shout out to your Blue Jays there, Boone.
Heck yeah. 1-1 in the series. We were joking before the show. I didn't get a chance to watch the game on Saturday because I had plans. Just foolish of me to make plans and not realize the Blue Jays were going to make it to the World Series. But yeah, we got a chance. I think, still big time underdogs, but nice to see the Jays making it there and showing out pretty well so far. For Golden, though, maybe you're going to talk me off the ledge on this one, but it's Coping Corner to me. I'm worried, and it's not that I dislike Golden at all. I think he certainly can become an asset in fantasy. He's not earning targets at a high rate. He didn't really do that in college, so I guess maybe we shouldn't be that surprised that he's not doing it in the pros, because he's not necessarily that kind of receiver. But he's also not having enough splash plays to kind of make up for the lack of volume. You would hope that, especially in this offense, they'd be able to scheme him up, that he'd have a few of these just monster games already. Hasn't happened yet. He's a rookie, and a lot of things can change for rookies, and we say this all the time. They can get more comfortable along the way, and all of a sudden the light flicks on, and the offense, they start to get used a little different, and boom, they start to produce here. But I mean, is the 3 of his next 4 here, the Panthers, the Eagles, the Vikings, those are all tougher matchups for wide receivers. And, you know, we've talked before too about how the Packers just spread the ball around. They don't necessarily want to have that true number one guy. So I don't think he's going to become a featured wide receiver in this offense. You do have Christian Watson back now. You do have Jaden Reed eventually. Tucker Kraft might be the true like number one receiver in this attack.
Yes.
I don't know.
Facts.
He could be a flex. He could have some big games, but are you ever going to feel confident aside from like just the pure rookie hope that along the way he puts it together and emerges late in the season? I don't see really any reason for me to have him in my lineup. And I really question whether you'd want to have him on your roster because he's just a flex play. And when we get to the waiver wire section later, we're to talk about a whole bunch of receivers that are kind of in that same value range that are all flex plays that you can get week in and week out. So why carry him on your roster? Like, why waste that spot if you could just go to the waiver wire whenever you want and find one of those guys?
I think that's fair. I agree with a lot of what you said. Like, he's not earning targets. He wasn't a target earner in college. I don't really think he fits the quote target earning wide receiver archetype. He's a vertical guy that is going to have to rely on splash plays. I do just want to point out this, again, a chart if you're watching on YouTube from Ron Stewart, who does great work on his YouTube channel. Again, just to quote, the idea that rookie wide receivers have league winning upside down the stretch of a season is the most harped on edge in fantasy football, but it's for good reasons. Since 2010, 21 rookie wide receivers have posted 16 plus PPR, I believe, points per game from week 9 on. This is a T-Mac, Travis Hunter, etc. tweet. I also noticed in the comments that it was pointed out that if you just do since 2019, 14 rookie wide receivers have done this. So this is right around the time when, rookies get ramped up in the back half of the season, which is just why I struggle to drop Matthew Golden. This at the same time, though, it's not as if he's one of these day 2 guys that hasn't gotten opportunity. He has been on the field. So he was the 86th overall player off the board in fantasy drafts for some of these risk reward propositions. So far, you've seen more risk than reward. I don't really want to drop him. I would still just rather have him be like the last player on my bench, but I do understand that certain teams are not going to be able to afford that luxury. So I think he is a total panic player. I think he's kind of a total panic player. I love this, that he deactivated his Instagram account, so he's right on track to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver. I do kind of think he is a total panic player in redraft. I'd be panicking a little bit if I spent high resources on him from a dynasty perspective. But I'm not. I'm a little hesitant to go coping corner just because he's a rookie wide receiver in a good offense, and typically we do see those guys bounce back in the back half. And by the way, last thing, I also don't think Golden has been bad, like in isolation. I just think he's in a crowded room.
Well, and I think that list of receivers that we just had up there a second ago, when you look at that list, not many of them kind of seem like the receiver that Golden is, right? Like a lot of those guys were true number one alpha types. Like, I don't know that he kind of makes sense with some of the names on that list, right? Like, but I will also say a little feather in your cap is you talked me back from the Travis Hunter coping corner a couple weeks ago, and then Travis Hunter comes out and blows up and has a great game. So maybe you're doing it again. Maybe you're going to talk me out of coping corner. I will agree. We will go total panic for now, and we'll see where it goes. Though I will say that Travis Hunter's a guy that I had at least a little more faith in, that he could potentially make me look foolish if he went to coping corner. I don't know that Golden really worries me in that way, but we'll see how it works out. I'm with you. We'll go total panic.
Yeah, we'll give it a couple more weeks on Golden, but it's certainly trending in the wrong direction. Again, he went late enough in drafts that it shouldn't be that big of a problem if he's crushed. He's not crushing your team. Like Travis Hunter was actually kind of crushing your team for where he went in drafts, so you should be able to work around the Matthew Golden thing. Again, I'd just rather park him on the end of my bench and see what happens. All right, so those are our wide receivers. Let's wrap this up with a little bit of quarterback panic here. And loosely, the second one is quarterbacks. Starting with Julian on Caleb Williams. Appreciate you and Boone. How scared are you for Caleb Williams? He started really strong, but has, quote, ghosted us the last 2 weeks. I'm lucky he didn't put my team 6 feet under. Happy Halloween. Well done, Julian, on some of these Halloween puns here. What's your panic level on Caleb Williams?
I'm going total panic, and I'm a guy who looked at his schedule a couple weeks ago, and I thought, okay, this is a stretch where he's going to set himself apart. He's going to get comfortable in the offense. He's going to put up some good performances. And then later in the season, when the schedule does get tough, he at least has that base to work off of, and we'll have more faith in him going into those games. But like, he's not playing at a high level. He's still missing throws. He does not look comfortable out there, even in what should be easier matchups. Like, I'm not going to go coping corner with him by any means. And part of that is like the week 9 opponent here, right? Like, talk to me after he plays the Bengals, because since he just let Justin Fields go off against them, I think we're going to see Caleb have a fine game. I think he's probably going to come out, and have a pretty good game here. But it's been like good game, bad game. It's been up and down. It's been one of these like roller coaster rides where it's very tough to project. And if we were just looking at the matchups, we would have said that the last couple weeks he would have had big games, and yet he hasn't, right? So the Bengals is the one. That's the matchup. At least 20 fantasy points to 5 of the last 7 quarterbacks they've faced. So we're not putting Caleb in the coping corner. You have that matchup looming. You have that get right spot. They also have the Giants the week after that, which is one where maybe he can come through in that one. But just the fact that I'm talking about it like that, Harmon, like I'm kind of rolling my eyes and going like, maybe he's just not where we thought he was going to be at this stage of the season. We gave him time to kind of get comfortable in this Ben Johnson system. We see a lot of other elements in that offense coming through, and yet he's not. And to go with like the Halloween theme, you want to talk about scary. Let's look at his schedule later in the year, right? Week 13 on Eagles, Packers, Browns, Packers again. Do you have a lot of faith in Caleb in those matchups? And again, that is a time when it matters so much for fantasy. I don't, based on what I've seen. So it's total panic for me right now.
I agree. It's total panic. If I'm a Bears fan, I'm not total panicking about him being like the franchise quarterback. Like I'm still willing to give it some time there. And God, it's so emotional on Bears Twitter all the time about everything. So I'd give it a beat with Caleb Williams, the franchise quarterback panic. But from a fantasy standpoint, yeah, like find another option here. You can try to start him in this week 9 game against the Bengals because of the matchup. But if he face plants there and then that Giants matchup, the Steelers in where we're at right now, yeah, I think total panic makes a lot of sense. Let's stick in the NFC North here for this next one. Travis sends one in on, I guess, everybody on the Vikings. Says, hey, guys, big fan of the show and the panic meter specifically. After getting their cheeks absolutely clapped by the Chargers, I think the Vikings should be discussed as a total panic conversation. Aside from Justin Jefferson getting a solid 10 to 14 point floor every week on volume, everything else seems cooked. They traded for Adam Thielen, and he's done nothing. Hawkinson is doing practically nothing. Mason/Jones are doing little for the run game, and Carson Wentz is Carson Wentz. Their schedule is also tough sledding going forward, so I think it's a very, very Jover for this team at this point. What do you guys think? Worth noting for Carson Wentz, unfortunately, he was sent. He's having season-ending shoulder surgery on his left shoulder. We just found that out right before we started recording, which my eyeballs could have told you he needed season-ending surgery after watching him truly suffer through that game on Thursday. I mean, my God, it was outrageous. So we don't know who's starting at quarterback in week 9. We assume it will be the first round pick that they made a couple years ago in JJ McCarthy. So now that the Wentz era is over, we're back to your boy, JJ McCarthy. Where are we at with the Vikings as just an entire ecosystem from a panic meter standpoint?
I don't think we can put this whole offense in the coping corner, but I will say I think it's total panic, right? It's just looking like it's going to be one of those lost seasons. They've had some injuries. They've had some bad decisions that have kind of just crushed them. The offensive line can't stay healthy. I think that has been a huge problem for them all year because with the quarterbacks that they've gone with, they needed that right environment. They needed that offensive line to be strong, and then they could take advantage of the weapons that they have. And the offensive line has just been like a revolving door. All of these guys have basically gotten hurt throughout the year at some point. So that's been really tough for them to overcome. We'll see if JJ McCarthy looks any different, like, coming off the injury break and whether he had a chance to like reset like we saw Bryce Young do last year when he sat down for a bit and then he came back and in the second half of the season looked much better. I hope that's the case, but I don't even think we're looking for JJ McCarthy to come in and be like, great. We're just looking for someone that can keep this offense like above water. We don't need to right the ship. We just need to keep the ship on the water and prevent it from sinking. But if you look at some of the pieces, like, you look at, JJ, you look at Addison, like these guys are still producing fine. Like they're all putting up like double-digit fantasy points every week. So I think they're fine. Those guys, the backfield is going to be very frustrating. And I think now we just have to readjust that Jordan Mason's like a touchdown or bust RB3 type. He's not going to be that guy that's going to run away with things. And that goes back to the offensive line, the struggles at quarterback. All that stuff have changed the environment there. Hawkinson, we already have in the coping corner, I'm pretty sure, so we don't need to take him out or anything. But the receivers are going to be fine. Overall, there's a lot of panic because we just don't know what we're getting from the quarterback position.
Yeah, I completely agree on essentially everything you just said there. It goes back to the offensive line. Like part of the reason we were willing to be really optimistic about Jordan Mason was a guy I loved taking in drafts this year, and I have a lot of Jordan Mason. And my expectations on him have just dramatically changed at this point because part of the reason to be bullish on him was this investment in the offensive line. And that's just like Ryan Kelly, Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill, like all these guys have missed significant time this year. It's not the unit that we expected. So it is what it is, which is, by the way, very coping corner language that I'm throwing out there for Jordan Mason saying it is what it is. And then for Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, these guys are 10th and 11th among wide receivers in yards per game the last 3 weeks. Just around like 10 points for Justin Jefferson, 10.7. Jordan Addison, 13.7. So that's not crushing you, but I think I'm totally panicking because of just the adjustment of expectations for this group here. Anything else to add on the Vikings, Boone?
I was just going to say, if people want like a little bit of hopium about this offense, there could be like a little bit of Jake Browning Bengals situation where that schedule was so tough initially when Browning took over and the offense looked terrible. And now we're seeing, of course, another quarterback come in Joe Flacco, but the schedule getting much easier. And we're seeing some value coming from those guys. Because if you look at the Vikings schedule, like, you look back the last month, it's been Browns, bye, Eagles, Chargers. Those are 3 very tough matchups. They still have to face the Lions this week. That's a Lions defense that's been playing over their heads. They're getting some guys back healthy probably, so that's a tough one. But then it's Ravens and Bears, which is easier. Packers and Seahawks, which are tough. But then late in the season, from weeks 14 to 16, Commanders, Cowboys, and Giants. So there could be some spots in here where we see this offense still really produce, and hopefully the offensive line can get healthy at some point.
All right, so those are our submissions to the Panic Meter this week. We did not have any time for any social media submissions because you guys crushed it on the email submission. So shout out to the emailers. As I say every week, that's the way to make sure you get in the show. You send those emails in, you get on the show. So we love to see the listeners and the viewers responding there. Check in on the coping corner before we toss the break. Chase Brown out, Alvin Kamara in. That's what we updated this week. And I'm Boone. I feel really good about where we settled with the coping corner this week. We are going to at some point have to get a little more bold with some of these coping corners. But I agree that we've helped each other kind of level out on this.
For sure. We're still being smart about it, but the further you go, even when I'm doing my waiver wire column every week, right? The further you get in the season, the lists get a little tighter because you don't need to have as many names in there. You kind of get a better feel for what's going on. The coping corner is kind of like the opposite. As we get a better feel, we're going to know exactly which guys to throw in there.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, Justin Boone has his players he's adding off the waiver wire. We'll get into that right after this. All right. We are back. It is time to dive into the waiver wire as we head into week 9. As always, we go position by position. Let's start with quarterbacks. Boone, who are we looking at this week?
So we're going to start off with Sam Darnold. He's going against the Commanders. We're going to talk about Trevor Lawrence here as well. He gets the Raiders. Aaron Rodgers versus the Colts. And then maybe we'll talk about J.J. McCarthy at the end if we have some time. But, just as a stash, not as a guy you're playing this week, just as a stash. But
really sold that ringing endorsement.
Just sneak him in at the end of your bench. We'll see what happens. Darnold, coming off one of his worst games of the season, so I get why people might be worried about playing him, but then he goes on bye. And the game against the Texans, I mean, that's a very tough matchup, right? So we're not really going to dock him for having a bad game there before the bye. Prior to that, he finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 3 of his previous 4 outings. We were singing his praises. We were saying that this guy is playing fantastic in Clint Kubiak's system. He looks really good. I apologized already to him on the whole that I thought he was going to struggle going to Seattle. He's not struggling at all. He is certainly somebody that's in the conversation as a low-end QB1 or at worst a high-end QB2 right now for fantasy. And in weeks where there's like a bunch of buys, he is probably going to sneak into the top 12. So he's right in that range this week. Trevor Lawrence, I mean, we just talked about the Jaguars guys. Can we see both these guys be healthy? Is BTJ going to be out there? Will he have both of these top weapons? And will we finally see them like unleashed? Can Travis Hunter be the number one guy? Can both these guys get going in a matchup against the Raiders? I mean, maybe. Like, if you look at Lawrence, he hasn't been great for fantasy, but he's warming up, right? Top 14 fantasy quarterback in 3 straight games, top 14 in 4 of his last 6. So he's putting up okay points. He's not winning you necessarily any weeks, but he's doing all right out there as a streamer. I think you could play him. And then Aaron Rodgers, I mean, since the Steelers bye, Rodgers has been a pretty decent fantasy quarterback if you needed a fill-in. Not another guy that you probably don't need to win your week for you, but you just need somebody to get you by. QB 16, QB 7, QB 14 in his last 3. He gets the Colts this week too. Indy banged up on defense. And aside from just like they've taken advantage of Cam Ward twice now, they beat up on Geno Smith once as well. Other than that, they've given up a bunch of top 12 results in fantasy this year. QB 2, QB 7, QB 2, QB 11. So Rodgers, I think this is another spot where he could be a bye week replacement for people out there. And then JJ McCarthy, it's just me probably holding on to my priors before the season. But you go out, you pick him up, you see if in some of these easier matchups he can get going. We talked about how, tough matchups to start the season. The Falcons defense can sometimes show up, although they've weirdly had like a couple just absolute flops this year, and they're coming off one this week as well. They did it against the Panthers earlier in the season too, but he played against them in week 2, did not have a good result in that game. Could he, in better matchups, get going with those weapons around him if the offensive line can get healthy? Maybe, but we're looking at him more for Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues, of course.
Well, these first 3 guys are in really good spots this week from a streaming perspective. Rodgers against the Colts, I think they could do a lot. I mean, Arthur Smith is Arthur Smith, but he can do some fun stuff with these tight ends against some of the linebackers there. They always, seemingly every single week, the Colts allow some speedy kind of receiver to get loose on him, whether it was Troy Franklin that one week. We saw it last week, this last game with Chamir DK ripping him up on some horizontal routes. Could that be Calvin Austin? Could it be Roman Wilson? I could see that happening in this game. Darnold, obviously, him and JSN are just going to go to work against this Washington secondary. And yeah, Trevor Lawrence, he's scrambling. So there's at least that. At least he's scrambling. There's that. There's some good streaming options here this week. I do like that. Let's get to running back, where we have some interesting names after some injuries this past week.
Yeah, always the most fun position to talk about, and it's never fun when there's injuries, and that's why these guys are getting vaulted into more opportunity, but that's the case with the first one here. Tyron Tracy Jr., somebody who I liked before the season, who we thought there was a chance that he could get going early in the year. He ended up getting hurt. Cam Scatteraboo blew up. Now Cam Scatterboo's hurt, and Tracy's going to get a chance to take this job back. Dylan Sampson, he's on bye. Quinshon Judkins, he's a little bit banged up here. They're calling him day-to-day. They're going on bye, so we'll see. I think the expectation when you hear day-to-day is that he'll be ready coming out of the bye, but they also said it's an AC joint sprain, and they have no reason to tell us that he's out for weeks right now. They can just call him day-to-day, go on their bye, and then come back from the bye and reassess and maybe give more information then. So I'm picking up Dylan Sampson just in case that injury is concerning and just in case Judkins misses a little bit of time or is potentially limited coming back from the bye. Tajay Spears, we've talked about a bunch of times here. He's going up against the Chargers, which is a tough matchup, but you're not necessarily grabbing him for this matchup specifically. You're grabbing him because he's a guy that has almost started to take over this backfield a little bit, right? Yeah. This week broke the big play, finished with 12 touches for 82 scrimmage yards and a touchdown. He's played more than Tony Pollard, more snaps than Tony Pollard, 2 of the last 3 games here. Pollard's been a rumored trade candidate, so maybe he's a guy that gets moved and all of a sudden Spears gets more opportunity. And Spears is just somebody who's had these stretches before where he becomes a fantasy difference maker. He did it in the fantasy playoffs last year. Could he do it down the stretch again this year if Tony Pollard gets moved or hurt, or potentially just sent to the bench to get a younger guy more opportunity there? And then the last one, kind of similar to kind of the same boat here to Tajay Spears, Isaiah Davis. He's on bye this week. Breece Hall just had that huge game. His stock has never been higher. So, hey, at least this season, maybe he could get moved coming off of this game while they're on bye. He did it against a very, very good matchup in the Bengals. I don't know that we're going to see him perform like that again, but if he gets moved, that's really why we're looking at Davis. If he gets moved, Davis steps in as the lead back in that offense. And Davis had a pretty good game himself this week, right? Like Breece Hall went off, but Davis quietly over 100 scrimmage yards in that contest. So if Hall gets dealt, if he eventually gets hurt at some point, if the opportunity arises, we could see Davis take over there. So I think those are the four guys, but obviously Tyron Tracy Jr. is the one that people should focus on. He's the guy that you're putting in a big bid on. He's the player that looks like he is going to be the starter as long as he stays healthy for the rest of the season. And I just wish, it's so unfortunate that it has to be when there's an injury like this to just such an exciting young player like Cam Scadaboo. And yet you look at the opportunity now for Tracy and you think about what he did last year, right? 839 rushing yards, 284 receiving yards. The vast majority of that production came after he moved into that more prominent role and took over from week 5 on. And from that point on in the season last year, he was a top 24 fantasy back. Like he has that in his bag. He could potentially give us that again with Jackson Dart out there, making that offense a little more exciting. Devin Singletary is going to be involved, of course. People could stash him. He's not the guy you want to play here. It's going to be Tracy giving you hopefully low-end RB2 numbers. At worst, I would think RB3 numbers in an offense that has a little more juice and a little more opportunity than we thought it would before the season.
I'm pretty excited about Tyron Tracy, not just because I have him stashed in a couple places, because I like to churn that bench spot. It was just, hey, let me throw a backup running back in here in case there's any injuries when I'm moving Garrett Wilson or something to IR after a given week or whatever. And unfortunately, Cam Scadaboo was the guy that got hurt, so I just luckily stumbled onto Tyron Tracy in at least a couple leagues there. So I am excited about that part, like having him on my roster. But I also think, part of the reason that Scadaboo, two reasons that Scadaboo broke out, besides the fact that he's just a badass player, is one, this offensive line is playing really well with Andrew Thomas back in there. He's been a difference maker, so that's been a bit of a upgrade from a run blocking perspective. Tracy can take advantage of that as opposed to what was happening early on in the year. And two, Jackson Dart, despite being a guy that wants to take off and run, has been willing to use the running back in the passing game. Now, I don't know what Tracy's stance is on smashing his helmet against Dart in some of these situations. But I don't know if they're quite going to be the bash bros like Dart and Scadaboo, the BFFs were, but maybe he can, smack his helmet into him a couple times and he can get some of those targets as well. So I do like Tracy going forward as a guy that could end up becoming, like you said, an every week running back too. I also wanted to point out with Tajay Spears here, you mentioned the matchup with the Chargers. It's kind of an up and down one. The run games that they have struggled with, though, are these kind of speed backs to the perimeter. Think about Ja'Cory Krosky, Merritt, some of the guys that have gotten over on this Chargers run defense. Obviously, last week, Jordan Mason is not that type of guy, which is why I think they struggled to get that run game going. 0% rushing success rate from the Vikings in that game against LA last week. But Spears is that more perimeter run-based player. So I really like him as somebody to pick up and maybe even be like a sneaky start this week if you're desperate.
And just a sneaky start in a lot of weeks, especially during buys and stuff. He can give you that production. He can break a big play. And just a guy who's shown us that he can do it for stretches before. So these guys need to be rostered in more places. Like Tyron Tracy's up pretty close to that 50% rostered cutoff. He's the obvious pickup here. But when we look at these other names, like Dylan Sampson is by far the guy who would take over. And he took over in the backfield when Judkins left this game this week, right? So he could step right in. He's just 13% rostered. Spears is at 31, but we've been talking him up for weeks now. That needs to be much higher. These guys should be rostered in every league. Isaiah Davis, just 9% rostered when there's all these rumors out there that, that Breece Hall could get traded. That seems crazy to me. So let's get those numbers up, everybody. Go and pick these guys up. Find the spots on your bench. I know it's tough during bye weeks, but you got to get these guys on your benches and maybe even into your lineups, like you said about Spears.
We'll just note on Breece Hall and Tony Pollard, it does kind of feel like the running back trade destinations are potentially drying up here, which is no shock. The supply is always greater than demand at running back. With DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai playing well in Chicago, Kimani Vidal looking like he can hold it down in LA for the Chargers, I am struggling to see obvious landing spots for these backs. So there is a chance that just Pollard remains with the Titans and Breece Hall remains with the Jets. I just wanted to note that as we're talking these running back pickup options.
I'm just worried, and I don't want to say this, but I feel the need to, that we're recording this before the Monday nighter and that the Chiefs play tonight. So hope there is not any injuries in that game. Hope everybody performs well, but that could be a destination. I would love to see a guy like Breece Hall end up in that offense. Not as a Bills fan, but as a fantasy manager and a fantasy analyst, I would love to see Breece Hall get in an offense like that.
You'll get Kareem Hunt and you will like it. All right. How about that, pal? All right. We're going to take one last quick break. When we come back, we'll talk through wide receivers, tight ends, and a deep sleeper off the waiver wire right after this. All right. We're back. We're continuing to look at waiver wire options heading into week 9 of the NFL season. Boone, let's get into wide receivers.
Yeah, all these guys are kind of in a very similar range. So if people want to shuffle them up and have them a different way, that's fine. I'm not going to put up too much argument. The way I have them right now is Kayshon Boutte versus the Falcons, Trey Tucker versus the Jags, Troy Franklin at the Texans, and then Chimere Dike at the Chargers versus the Chargers. He's at home in that one. And we can go through them a little bit. Their names, a lot of these guys that we've already talked about on the show before that I've written up in my waiver wire column. Kayshon Boutte, he's just become like a really solid player in this Patriots offense, right? He's kind of on a hot streak right now. Stat lines the last 3 weeks: 5 for 93 and 2 touchdowns, 2 for 55 and a touchdown, 3 for 75 in a touchdown. You'd be very happy if you had him in your lineup for those 3 games. He's not cleared 100 yards. He's not cleared 100 yards or a touchdown. No, he has cleared 100 yards or a touchdown in 5 of his 8 appearances
week 1
this season. Yeah, sometimes you get those stats backwards when you write them down. Drake May is just playing at an extremely high level, and Boutte's kind of going along for the ride here, and he's getting a ton of volume. He's running the most routes in that offense, so he certainly warrants consideration. I have him in the wide receiver 3 flex range. You look at Trey Tucker, I mean, he's been like a real, boom or bust guy for fantasy in the past. This year, he's still doing it, but the booms are way bigger, right? At least 70 scrimmage yards in 4 of his first 7 games here, 33 yards or less in the other 3. So you're either getting that great performance from him or you're going to be very unhappy he's in your lineup, but that's okay if you're putting him in your flex spot, right? You want to see a guy that can go out and have a monster game like he did when he had 3 touchdowns a month ago or so. And coming off his bye, he gets favorable matchups here against the Jags in week 9, the Cowboys in week 11. That's 2 of his next 3. There's also the looming possibility that Jacoby Myers could get traded before the deadline. So much buzz on that out there. I feel like if anybody gets dealt, this one makes a lot of sense. They just signed veteran Tyler Lockett there. Is that just a precursor to trading away Jacoby Myers? Maybe.
Yes.
And I don't think Lockett being there would be that much of a concern. I don't think he has that much left in the tank, unfortunately. So if Jacoby Myers gets traded, I think Tucker's fantasy outlook would get a bump as well on top of what he's already done this season. So he's in that wide receiver 4 flex range with Jacoby Myers there. If Myers gets traded, then we're talking about him potentially as a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way. Troy Franklin popped up for another really big game this week, 6 catches for 89 yards, 2 touchdowns in that one. It's worth noting that the playing time is only seen like a slight uptick though in recent weeks. You kind of wish that he would become a full-time player. That's just not happening, but he has garnered 18 targets over the last 2 outings here. He's found the end zone 3 times during that span. He's also benefited from a pretty easy schedule in those games, and now it's going to be a much tougher contest against the Texans in week 9. So keep all of that in mind. That's why I might not have him at the top of this list. I'm guessing some other waiver wire articles out there might because of that big game that he just had. But he's a guy that you could look to and play. Just know, like the other guys that I'm mentioning, there's kind of that boom bust element to him. So he's a wide receiver 4 flex play, but a guy who has a much higher ceiling when he does come through for you. And then Chimere Dike, the Titans rookies, they've been pretty productive. These receivers are coming through. You factor in these are day 3 guys. I think it's pretty impressive what they've been doing, right? And Alec Manor, he earned the role earlier in the season. His numbers have been kind of level all year long, but he hasn't topped 60 yards in a game. So he's not showing that true ceiling where DK, he has, right? With Calvin Ridley missing some time recently, we see DK go out there, 4 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown in week 7, 7 grabs for 93 yards over the weekend. We don't know for sure how this is all going to shake out if Calvin Ridley comes back and when Calvin Ridley comes back. But I think if you're looking to invest in one of these rookies, and if you're looking to invest probably fairly cheap into this offense, DK would be the guy to go with, although investing in the Titans offense might not be the way to win yourself a fantasy championship, But if you need one of those like bye week fill-ins, you need a guy to step in as a flex for you, I think DK would be the one in that offense that I would go after.
I think DK's clearly impressed me more the last couple weeks than A.O. Manor has this year. And like Tyler Lockett being released freed up DK to be that speed slot receiver for this team.
Yeah.
So I like him definitely the best out of that receiving, the rookies there rest of season. Kayshon Boutte, man, 3 or fewer catches in 6 games this year, but it hasn't mattered because Drake May and him are white hot in terms of the downfield passes. He has 8 targets the last 2 games, and he's averaging over 20 air yards, and he's converting on so many of those. It's just outrageous stuff from Kayshon Boutte. At some point, he's going to have a floor game with catching that few passes every single week, but there's not – I just looked at it. There's not a red flag matchup here in the next few weeks. Like last week kind of was, and he still came through. So you can he should be 40% rostered. That should be way higher. And I'll just disagree a little bit about Troy Franklin. He's at least on the field 77% of the routes, which is good enough. Like it's unprecedented for a second receiver. But I definitely think he's the shakiest bet here. Not the shakiest bet because DK plays in a worse offense and so does Trey Tucker, but I still would like to see some more Pat Bryant there. So tough matchup for him as well in Houston this week. Let's go to tight ends where we have some more interesting names to discuss.
Yeah, I went with a shorter list here this week just because you can go check out my column if you want to look for deeper tight ends. But once you get past these 3 guys, all the guys are kind of the same. You're taking shots, you're taking risk with all of them. But the top 3 are all players that I think people should go out and get who could potentially be top 12, top 15 fantasy tight ends the rest of the way. First one's Harold Fannin Jr., but he's on bye this week. The second one is Mason Taylor, but he's on bye this week. And the third one is Juwan Johnson at the Rams. And I mean, looking at Fannin, we've talked about him a bunch of times on the show, and he's right up there close to that 50% rostered mark. So he might already be taken in your league out there, but 62 yards and a touchdown over the weekend. He did get a little banged up in that game, so that's another one that we're going to have to monitor. And he's going on bye, so you can't use him this week, but a guy that genuinely could be a tight end 1 the rest of the way for fantasy. And his teammate, this is another situation. We talked about some of the running backs that you could pick up and stash and might have more value if the starter ahead of them gets traded. Well, we're already seeing Fannin give some value playing alongside David Njoku. What happens if David Njoku gets traded? And he's also been rumored to potentially get moved. So he's a name to consider there. Mason Taylor, 5 for 34 and a touchdown this weekend, but being on bye, he might get dropped or he might be still available. You could get him. He's at worst going to be the number 2 target in that offense. And then Juwan Johnson's the interesting one. 28 targets, 19 catches, 176 yards and a touchdown over those first 3 games. Then the numbers just fell off for 3 or 4 weeks. It was because he was hurt. He was dealing with injuries. Now he's healthy. He's getting back to that early season production. 10 receptions, 132 yards over his last 2 outings. There's talk like we had earlier that Rashid Shaheed could get moved in a deal. So regardless, I think you're looking at Johnson as somebody that can be that strong bye week fill-in, maybe even sneak into the low end tight end 1 conversation.
I like it. Yeah, I totally agree. He can definitely kind of hang out in that range going forward. All right, give us one deep sleeper as we head into week 9.
Another guy on bye. I don't know why everybody's on bye that I'm telling you to pick up this week, but I think it's because the mindset should be the rest of the season, making a push for the fantasy playoffs. That's where a lot of my teams are. That's what I'm thinking about right now. Tank Bigsby is the guy that I want to bring up. And there's been a lot of changes in that Eagles backfield behind Saquon Barkley going into the season. We thought it was going to be Will Shipley. He got hurt. A.J. Dillon got an opportunity. Then he took a back seat. Shipley's back from the injury, but Tank Bigsby is the guy that made it pretty clear this weekend. He is the backup to roster there. He got the most volume behind Saquon Barkley, and Saquon Barkley suffered a groin injury. So they're going on the bye. We'll see coming out of the bye. They're saying it's minor, but if Saquon isn't 100% coming out of the bye, Tank Bigsby is the one to roster behind him in that backfield.
I love it. Yeah, he looked pretty explosive this past game against the Giants. First time we've really seen a flash from him in the Eagles uniform. So that's Justin Boone's waiver wire pickups heading into week 9. Remember, folks, we are reading again. Boone, the people are I've been getting people saying it back to me, so this is good. The people know they're supposed to be reading again in 2025, so they can check out your waiver column on the website if they need some more options to pick up. Shout out to Boone, a packed episode here on the People's Panic Meter. Again, I think we're really helping each other out here, Boone, this season. We're keeping each other level-headed, I think.
Absolutely, as we should. It's what good teammates do.
That is what good teammates do. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode. Tomorrow, Ray Garvin joins me for another edition of the Data Dump as we share 10 stats you need to know heading into Week 9. That's going to be live right here, 5 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Until then, we are out.